If a woman in a plain white shirt and worn-out flats accidentally walked into a multi-million-dollar boardroom, what would you do? Smile and greet her, or laugh and call security? At Orion Stratton, a prestigious tech conglomerate, a so-called temporary secretary became the punchline among tailored suits and power ties, simply because she didn't look like someone with authority. But no one knew. She was the fiancée of the man who had just taken over the entire company overnight. And that very meeting, where she was humiliated, would become the most costly lesson in their careers. This is the story of Elena Grace. She didn't slam the table. She didn't seek revenge. She simply stood up and made an entire corporation bow. Do you believe that sometimes, just because you're wearing a plain white shirt and a pair of scuffed flats, the world will rush to place you at the very bottom of the social ladder? That afternoon, on the 72nd floor of the dazzling Westwood Tower, Elena Grace had only meant to deliver a stack of documents to the executive suite and quietly slip away. But fate had other plans, plans that turned her into the afternoon's amusement for a room full of expensive suits. The marble doors swung open. The lights above cast a sheen on the polished stone floor. And then a voice, sweet but sharp as venom, rang out. Restroom to the left, billion-dollar boardroom to the right. Don't get lost, little receptionist. The room erupted into laughter. Chairs scraped the floor. Crystal glasses clinked in celebration, as if to toast this cruel little joke. A senior executive, wearing a gold-plated watch, snapped his fingers toward security, his eyes filled with disdain. Get her out of here. Don't let the tea girl ruin our billion-dollar discussions. Elena stood still. Her hands clenched the documents. Her back remained straight. Her eyes swept across the room, brimming with arrogance and empty pride. But those eyes didn't waver. They didn't plead. They didn't even retaliate. There was only one thing left behind: absolute calm. What no one knew was this: the woman they had just humiliated for fun wasn't just some temp. She was the fiancée of Dominic Westwood, the man who had quietly acquired over 82% of their company's shares without any of them realizing it. And tonight, this petty insult would become the most expensive lesson of their lives. A lesson in this: never underestimate a soul dressed in simplicity. Before she became a shadow in a corner office high above Manhattan, Elena Grace had once been hailed as a rising star in the world of medical technology. At just 27, she was the co-founder of Clarity Health, an AI startup built on the dream of revolutionizing early disease diagnostics through deep learning models she had programmed herself. There were pitch decks, sleepless nights of algorithms, dreams that soared even higher than the glass towers of New York. But she trusted the wrong people. Her co-founders, who were also her life partners at the time, quietly refiled the technology patents, cut her out of the company, stripped away every share, every credit, every voice. What they left her with: a suitcase, a few sets of clothes, and a divorce letter as cold as a Brooklyn winter. She lost everything in a legal hearing that lasted just 7 minutes. Elena didn't fall because she failed. She fell because she was pushed by betrayal in tailored suits. She didn't cry in court. She didn't post her pain online. She chose to start over from nothing. No taites, no spotlights. Only one thing she never lost: the belief that as long as she could stand, she could still build again. In a fifth-floor walk-up with no elevator, every morning was a physical trial, and every night a quiet conversation with herself. And then, one soft rainy day, in a tiny bookstore in Soho, her hand brushed against someone else's, reaching for the same philosophy book. Dominic Westwood. He wore a simple gray sweater and metal-rimmed glasses. No fit, no bodyguards, just a smile warm enough to tip the axis of her world. They sat and spoke about philosophy, about questions no one else dared to ask. Elena never imagined that the man across from her, the one who always tipped generously but never bragged, was actually one of Wall Street's most powerful silent investors. But the truth didn't faze her. She had once stood at the top and watched it all fall apart. What she needed wasn't his name. It was the peace in his eyes. And in that quiet relationship, she kept one truth hidden: that she was working as a temp in his very own company, Orion Stratton. Part of her held back from shame. Part of her simply wasn't ready to tell him that she had once been a genius whose dream had been stolen. At Orion Stratton, where the sunlight from glass walls lit up luxury leather shoes more than it ever illuminated people's faces, Elena was nothing more than a temporary staffer, a title lighter than air, but heavier than being forgotten. She sat in a corner cubicle near the emergency exit, surrounded by piles of documents no one wanted touch. Every morning passed with the sound of high heels brushing past. Every afternoon, with glances that slid right over her, as if she didn't exist. One time, while pouring coffee in the pantry, a group from the marketing team walked in, heels clicking loudly on white stone floors. Claire, the woman who always wore Chanel and spoke through her nose, glanced at Elena, smirked, and said, "I thought they hired a new janitor." Laughter erupted. An empty container of heavy cream was tossed at Elena's feet like she was a trash bin. "Pick it up, would you? Suits your vibe," a man added. Elena didn't respond. She bent down, picked it up, placed it gently in the trash, wiped the spilled stain off the table, and then quietly walked away. Back straight, steps steady. Only her clenched jaw betrayed her. Another time, inside the elevator on the 72nd floor, Victor Reeve, director of financial strategy, spoke loudly into his phone, standing right next to her, deliberately within earshot. Another ghost woman sneaking into the executive elevator. These temps really think they matter. He and his two assistants laughed. One even mimicked Elena's tired posture, shoulders slumped, arms cradling documents. "Looks like a scene from Poor Secretary, the series." Elena said nothing. She stood still, eyes forward. She didn't argue, didn't shrink, didn't fall. Behind her, someone snapped a photo in secret and posted it on the company's internal group chat. Temporary life, sad and heavy. The comments mocked. Emojis laughed. But Elena didn't clap back. She didn't complain. She didn't report them. She just kept doing her job, pouring coffee, preparing files, correcting financial figures that the executives routinely overlooked. No one knew that those minor figures they ignored were the lifeblood of $1 million project about to be pitched to shareholders. And it was Elena, and Elena alone, who read through every line, every typo, every flawed projection. She did it all quietly, without praise or protest. She never needed to assert herself by fighting back. She only needed the right moment to prove she was never a nobody. That afternoon, a small ping echoed through the internal inbox of every employee at Orion Stratton. Subject line, urgent, change in shareholder structure. Within minutes, the news exploded like a fuse hitting gunpowder. An anonymous investment fund had acquired over 82% of the company's shares, becoming its uncontested controlling stakeholder. Panic spread like a kicked-over anthill. Department heads flooded the phone lines. Emergency meetings sprang up across every floor. Rumors ran wild. A merger, mass layoffs, bankruptcy, or worse, the company-wide purge. Greg Harland, director of product development, slammed the table. Who the hell has the power to buy out the company in just 2 days? No one had an answer, not even legal. Meanwhile, downstairs, Elena was quietly labeling financial files, meticulously, carefully, exactly as instructed. A task was handed to her more as a formality than a necessity, something to keep the temp busy before the inevitable layoff. While the executives scrambled toward the boardroom, Elena calmly aligned her folders, brushed a speck of dust from her hem, slung her canvas bag over her shoulder, and clocked out at 5 p.m. sharp, just like always. No one noticed her eyes pause on the scrolling numbers, the updates on equity stakes, the fund codes flashing on the screen, and how she smiled ever so slightly. That evening, while the vice president sat in a boardroom, sweating over blood-red bar graphs, Elena was seated at a small wooden table in a quiet Italian bistro in the West Village with Dominic, the man she still affectionately called Library Guy. This time, he tilted his head and asked gently, "Do you trust me?" Elena nodded, as if something in her gut whispered that this night would be unlike any other night of her life. When Dominic placed his hand over hers, his eyes held a light she had never seen before. Gone was the gentle glow she knew. What shone now was fire, the steel resolve of a man stepping into a battlefield. A battlefield he had quietly controlled from behind the curtain. A battlefield where, just hours from now, everyone who had ever mocked her would finally learn who they had laughed at. 6:04 p.m. The doors to the main boardroom burst open. The senior directors, still whispering speculations about who this mysterious new owner might be, fell dead silent. It wasn't a battalion of high-power consultants. It wasn't a Wall Street heavyweight stomping in with headlines behind him. It was Dominic Westwood, the man everyone assumed was just a reclusive academic, now entering in a bespoke midnight blue suit, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming beneath his cuff, and an aura that seemed to freeze the air in the room. And walking in right behind him wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a chief of staff. It was Elena Grace, still in her unbranded white shirt, still wearing those scuffed flats once mocked in the elevator. No muck-up. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose knot. But today she didn't walk in like a temp. She walked in like the truth they had all tried to ignore. Greg Harland, the man who once stole her algorithm, sat frozen, mouth agape, his face gone pale. Paul Kaner dropped his espresso cup onto the table. Victor Reeve stuttered so badly he couldn't even muster a greeting. Dominic took the head seat, opened his laptop. His voice was calm, like a newsreader on air. Orion Stratton is now officially under Westwood Capital. Certain executive positions will be reviewed within the next 48 hours. Then he looked up, and his tone sliced through the tension like a knife. We didn't buy this company to play. We bought it to clean the house. Every eye turned to Elena. No more laughter. No more murmurs of who is she, because some of them knew exactly who she was. They had torn her life apart. They had mocked everything she stood for. They had turned her name into a joke on their internal message boards. And now, she stood at the front of the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't deliver a grand speech. She spoke simply, as if reciting a well-worn chapter from the book of her life. I'm not here to reclaim what I lost. If I were like you, I'd sue. Idir ratalieta. I'd wield power to crush those beneath me. But I'm not like you. All I want is one thing: to see the people with real value finally get the opportunities they deserve, not just the ones who talk louder than they act. She turned to Greg, the man who once hijacked her startup dream. Her gaze held no rage. Only the clarity of a suspended verdict hangs in the air. And in that moment, viewers wouldn't be breathless from revenge, but from the silence of the mighty, brought low by their own arrogance, by the very disdain they once sowed. The meeting ended in a silence, so cold it could freeze breath. Greg Harland was the first to leave the room, his hands trembling as he held onto his files, as if he'd just been served a subpoena. The next morning's headlines exploded. Executive fired for stealing IP. Victim was fiancé of new majority shareholder. The names of those who had once mocked Elena, Paul Kaner, Victor Reeve, soon followed in a wave of dismissals, each cited for ethical violations and governance misconduct. But what shocked people even more was how Elena never crushed anyone. She didn't reclaim their seats. She didn't demand public apologies. She didn't gloat. Instead, she quietly requested a new meeting, not in the executive boardroom on the 72nd floor, but in the second-floor cafeteria where the coffee brewers, security guards, coders, and forgotten assistants spent their days. Dominic stood beside her and said just one sentence. I didn't buy this company because she's my fiancée. I bought it because they tried to bury the most brilliant woman I've ever known. The room fell silent. Then all eyes turned to Elena. She stepped forward, her voice not loud, but steady like iron beneath silk. I was once someone they forgot, the errand girl, the one they photographed to mock in private chats. But I also once programmed an AI platform that caught the attention of the FDA. So today, I'm not here to declare revenge. I'm here to restart this company's culture from scratch. A shy young coder raised her hand. I had an idea for an internal app, but I never submitted it. I was afraid they'd laugh. Elena nodded and handed her a pen. Let's start the first draft together. An older janitor whispered, I once gave feedback about the water filtration system, but they ignored it. Elena smiled. We'll add it to this month's budget. No drumrolls. No banners, no grand speeches, just a pair of scuffed flats, a white shirt that never changed, and a gaze that never lowered. That was all she needed to start a quiet revolution that everyone could hear. Just 1 week after the pivotal meeting, major financial outlets ran the same breaking headline. Stolen AI genius speaks out in quiet revolution at Orion Stratton. A journalist from TechVest Daily dug deeper and uncovered that Elena was the ousted co-founder of Clarity Health, the platform once hailed by the FDA as one of the most promising early detection algorithms of the decade. The article was accompanied by a photo. Elena standing in a hallway, wearing a plain white shirt, holding a folder in her arms, her face calm, composed. The caption beneath it broke the heart of a nation. The woman once mocked as a secretary turns out to be the genius they tried to bury. Social media exploded. CEOs sent interview offers. Tech conferences requested her as an honorary speaker. But Elena turned them all down. She didn't want to become a media phenomenon. She just wanted to get back to real work. In the small office Dominic gave her, there were no marble floors, no golden trophies on display. Only a whiteboard, a few cultural development diagrams, and a handwritten note that read, "Fairness doesn't exist by default. It must be designed." The employees began to shift their gaze. They didn't just respect her. They started learning from her. A programmer who hadn't spoken in 6 months offered to optimize an outdated algorithm. A female security guard suggested adding QR codes for client feedback so guests could feel heard. Elena listened to them all. Each morning, she commuted by subway, ate breakfast at her usual sandwich shop, and often stopped by the little bookstore where she'd first met Dominic. One day, standing beside him in the science section, she pulled out a newly published AI journal. On the very first page was a featured article quoting her past research. The impact of deep learning on early pancreatic cancer detection. Author, Elena Grace. She didn't say a word. She just smiled, softly, gently, but deeply. Dominic held her hand. There was no need for words because they both knew the world had finally recognized Elena. But more importantly, she had never lost herself to get there. The following month, Orion Stratton made a bold announcement. Elena Grace was officially appointed Chief of Culture and Innovation. But she didn't walk into her new office in designer heels or step out of a limousine. She was still Elena, with her scuffed flats, her worn canvas bag, her loosely tied hair. Only this time, the entire staff rose to their feet as she entered. Not out of fear, but because in her, they saw themselves, someone once overlooked but who never broke. At her first meeting, Elena didn't talk about KPIs. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote just one sentence. "Here, your title doesn't define your worth, your actions do." Then she handed the marker to a new intern. His hands trembled as he wrote down his first idea. The room went quiet. Then came the applause. 3 weeks later, Dominic quietly sent out invitations to 100 people. Not to shareholders, not to the press, but to the most unseen members of the company. The night shift guards, the janitorial staff, the newly hired software engineers, the administrative assistants. Each received a handwritten invitation, carefully penned, deeply personal. They weren't just guests. They were witnesses. The wedding of Elena and Dominic was held on the rooftop of an old library in Soho. There were no glittering diamond rings, just string lights swaying gently in the breeze, a single guitar, a modest cake, and a poem, read aloud by the very janitor who had once been ignored. Some people don't rise by climbing ladders. They rise by surviving what others wouldn't. Elena cried, not from sentiment, but because she knew she had won. Not by becoming like those who once trampled her, but by remaining kind, steady, like a tree that stands firm through the storm. Maybe the most painful thing isn't being underestimated, but being underestimated when you're doing the right thing. Elena Grace didn't wear a power suit. She didn't have Chief Executive Officer printed on a business card. The only thing she carried was a heart that refused to bow, and one no one could crush. She walked through floors where mockery clung like a shadow. They took pictures of her, laughed at the way she dressed, mocked her silence as if it were weakness. But they forgot one thing. When someone holds onto their dignity in the face of scorn and stays silent, they're not weak. They're gathering strength. Elena's story proves one truth. Not everyone who dresses simply is small. Not everyone who stays quiet is powerless. And not everyone who gets pushed out of the boardroom can't come back and change the entire culture of the company. She didn't just reclaim her own dignity. She gave a voice back to those who had been pushed aside. She showed the world. Sometimes, the way to start over isn't by climbing the old ladder, but by building a new one. One where anyone can rise, no matter what they wear, where they come from, or how they speak. And that is the message of this story. The lesson Elena leaves behind isn't just for those at the bottom. It's for those at the top, too. A reminder that anyone you dismiss today might rewrite your story tomorrow. Here's my personal take. A person's worth isn't defined by how the crowd sees them. It's defined by how they stand tall when trampled on, and how they choose kindness in a world that isn't always kind. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, if you've ever been misunderstood, undervalued, or told you weren't enough, leave a comment. Tell us your story. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, more people like Elena Grace, subscribe to Toch Story. Share this video with someone you care about. And join us in spreading the message that you don't need permission to shine. You just need the courage to be yourself all the way.